Sorry, a little technical detail here. Um, I forgot to switch on the recording of the video here, but I'll rerun it afterwards. So those who weren't here in real time, they will have I'll redo the recording up to here. So, number 9. Country and land are like nomads' pastures. People of Tingri, don't cling sentimentally to them. So, no reason to be attached to one place more than to another. All places and realms equally our homeland. What is the point? Having preferences. So, of course, not a lot of us are nomads with pastures these days. So this is a very Tibetan metaphor. But then again, many of us, we sort of are moving according to our professions. There's a lot more mobility actually now. If you think of how people move all over the planet, you constantly see U-hauls on the road and whatnot. So we are actually moving a lot, to kind of like nomads. And so we get the point. And particularly as practitioners then, we want to have this sense that we're at home then in the world, and we belong to this one realm of reality, you could say, or we could also say the 6 realms of samsara. We've sort of, for countless lifetimes, we've been reborn again and again and again in samsara, and we could see this as a place of our this is sort of our habitat, and all sentient beings are a bit like our fellow compatriots. So in this way, we should actually just regard this as places where we're presently just briefly there with finding grazing pastures, and then we'll be moving on. So there's no need to be particularly attached to one place more than any other. So as parents, all beings in the 6 realms have cared for you. People of Tingri, don't relate to them with your ideas of I and mine. So there's not a single sentient being that we're not connected to. Our likes and dislikes are entirely conditional. We cannot attain enlightenment if we sustain absolute anger. Absolute anger just in the sense of this determining that so-and-so is unworthy, and sort of making that an absolute truth. Anyway, we'd want to recognize that we are part of a single race of sentient beings. Actually, when we say Buddha nature in Tibetan, the term is Rik, Sanskrit is Gotra, and it's interesting that actually refers to, it actually means also caste. So the sense is really that we all belong to the same caste. Of course, we're not that fixated on castes in the extent that one probably was in the old India, but there's this sense that we're all linked together with this common, you could say, familiarity, this common gene. So here then we inhabit the space of our reality together with all beings, and our likes and dislikes, our flaring up of attachments or angers in regard to these beings, they're really just based on fleeting, impermanent and passing conditions. Over countless lifetimes, the tables have been switched around. We've been friends with some that now are our enemies. These enemies are now our friends, and we of course have seen this even in this present life. So we'd want to appreciate how ultimately we're connected in every way with all sentient beings. So we should stop establishing putting up these unnecessary barriers. Once we attain enlightenment, we won't have the slightest doubt about the value of including all sentient beings. We can't imagine the Dalai Lama saying, I like all sentient beings except so-and-so. As we know with the Dalai Lama's situation, this is reflected again and again. And even on the path, we cannot progress if we harbor such reservations. So this we want to follow through, and we can maybe even think about how certain politicians, they sort of elicit our absolute disapproval. In the present edition of the Lion's Roar magazine, that some of you might be familiar with, there's actually somebody who wrote an interesting article about liking a particular politician. And no, she said, how to love this particular politician. I shan't mention any names, even if you don't like him. So that kind of exercise might be helpful, recognizing that, you know, these people that we love to hate, and sometimes as politicians, they in fact are just as much worthy of compassion as anyone else. These likes and dislikes entirely conditional. Another key reflection: the day you were born, your death began approaching. People of Tingri, remember, there is never any time to spare. So, birth leads to death. Death constantly draws nearer. If we don't practice now, we will die with regret. Now is the time to practice. So, in general, in polite conversation, this is not something that we normally speak about. But the nature of a rishi, who actually, certainly in Tibetan, the etymology of the word drangsong just means someone who's straightforward. The nature of a sage is to speak bluntly about what is true. So there's no, you could say, avoiding the fact that anything that's born is destined to die, even though birth is such a joy. Then for countless reasons, including the Buddhist, of course, it is a wonderful thing. And also now that if, in case of a human baby, that's wonderful. There's a human existence. But we understand that it's the beginning of the end. That's how everything is. Everything that is composite is necessarily impermanent. So there's nothing that stops the swift journey towards death, just like an animal that's being led to being butchered. So as children then, we might, or youngsters, or even sort of in our early adulthood, we might be deluded thinking there's plenty of time. And Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse then says, your present life is just one life. Future lives are innumerable. Do not sacrifice so many lives just to pursue the illusory well-being of this present one. If you neglect to practice Dharma day after day, you will regret it bitterly. Okay, I'm just going to check if there's any questions. Doesn't seem like there is, actually. Okie dokie. I'm assuming that everybody can hear me. I just have someone who said that they couldn't hear or see anything. I'm seeing there's a fair amount of people attending, so I'm kind of assuming that you're all hearing. Yes. Okay, good. There's both. There is both video and audio. So, all right. Okay. Well, look. In this case, I'll just keep going. Yeah. Good. Thanks. So, fundamentally, there's no delusion. It's an ephemeral occurrence. People of Tingri look at the nature of what produces it. Now, this is really profound, and this is, of course, the premise of the entire path. All beings are naturally free from confusion. Clouds obscure the sun, but the sun is unaffected. Like clouds, the obscuring ignorance is insubstantial. With the removal of ignorance, the qualities of enlightenment become manifest. So this is in fact what we're doing. Sorry. So this is really the essence of what the Buddha taught and why we are practicing. All beings are naturally free from obscuration. They naturally possess all the infinite qualities of enlightenment. Khyentse just says you wouldn't wash a lump of coal, but then again, because it would be pointless. But we're not like that. I thought we could say it's a bit like cleaning a crystal. Of course, when we have a crystal and we see some grease on it or whatever, then we clean it and it comes crystal clear. So if we were intrinsically evil or obscured, there would be absolutely no point in the path. Buddha nature is unchanging in its what we call basic goodness. It might be obscured, it might be masked, but that doesn't actually change its basic nature. So clouds, they look like they obscure the sun, and they do, but if we go into the clouds, then we can see they're very light. And the presence or absence of the clouds doesn't in any way affect the nature of the sun. Ignorance is equally insubstantial and ephemeral. It obscures, it deceives, it masks, but it's not ultimately real. So when prajna, meaning when we're no longer caught by our deception or our constructs, we have various kinds of you could say obscurations based on destructive emotions, kleshas, neurosis, obscuration based on duality, habitual patterns, and so forth. But when we actually have the insight that's not caught by these obscurations, and this in its, you could say, nth degree is the complete realization of emptiness. But then again, even presently, it's intrinsic to our practice of the path and intrinsic to the practice of vipassana. So as we see through these, you could say, obscurations, not when we're not caught by neurosis or our obscurations, limitations, then we also begin to intuit and appreciate then the innate qualities of Buddhahood. So this is a bit like when the wind blows away the clouds, then we see the sun clearly. Without distraction, apply yourselves to the sacred Dharma. People of Tingri, after death, it will guide you on the path. So, youth deceives us into meaningless activity that we'll regret at death. Beauty, wealth, or power are useless in death. Only realization is of use. Let's turn back delusion now. Then it will be as Gambopa predicts. Starting now, we can face death well prepared. So, of course, in our culture, we have all this sort of expressions like youth is wasted on the young, and the sense of seizing the day, in a very hedonistic sense. And here, of course, we're coming from a different place, which is appreciating more the quality of the consciousness that will be, you could say, defined by at the time of our passing. But this is of course something that we need to be really clear on. This is how we actually gain our direction in our life, and we can be seduced, sidetracked into believing and investing in really short-sighted projects of this life. This could happen when we're young, but surprisingly, it happens into maturity as well. And this is where we reflect how at the time of death, all of these things, these projects will be inconsequential and pointless. Desirable qualities that we strive for, beauty, wealth, power, will have no say when we are about to pass away. they won't be of any benefit when we die. So, and not only that, they can't actually even prolong our lives. So the only thing that really will be of benefit for us is spiritual confidence, realization, peace of mind. So recognizing these obvious facts, let's choose not to ignore them anymore. As Khyentse says, let's turn back delusion now. And there is the sense that if we practice from this moment, and all of us might have, or most of us probably have received instructions that are aimed at both meditation session and post-meditation session. So there's never really a time when we couldn't practice. And this is where Gambopa says if we then follow through, then there's three signs that inevitably will occur, which is the best practitioner at the time of death will have absolute realization, complete confidence in Dharmakaya. The medium will be at ease and experience the perfect conditions for future practice in the next life, what is called rebirth in a pure realm. And the average practitioner will at least have no regret. So if we begin now, we will be prepared and able to apply the teaching at the time of death. Now, the truth of cause and effect ensures that actions yield their full result. People of Tingri, avoid all actions that are negative and evil. In that death is not the end, we should be concerned about how we construct ourselves. It is our own consciousness that will create our future body and realm. If we're aware of this, why relinquish even the slightest virtue? Now, our mind continues beyond physical death, so we should be concerned about the condition of our mind. This, of course, is completely the opposite of what you would say, what is you call it? Materialistic monism or physicalism will tell us, which is that we're just emergent properties of our brain, that we're nothing but neurons firing. And as some of you might know, this, in my opinion, could very well constitute certainly a leap of faith and possibly a very deeply flawed science. So if we look at the sages of Asia who don't exclude first-person subjectivity and consciousness, they seem to have some conclusive experience, both direct and also inferential, you could say valid science, in regards to the nature of consciousness and also in regards to the nature of our world, our experiences and so forth, which doesn't really operate from outside in, but rather vice versa, that what we experience as the world is what we call projection. Also, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, in his teaching on the four mindfulnesses, he says at one point, and I can't quote him exactly, but to the effect of, I hope you realize that everything there is, every perception, every bolt, every screw, every phenomenon is created by your mind. So this is a premise really for the entire Buddhist teaching. So this is very important. This is why we don't really necessarily endorse this, what some sort of apologists for Western science among the Buddhist crowd. They would like to sanitize Buddhism of things like the notion of enlightenment, the notions of reincarnation, and the notions of karma. These are kind of key in understanding how our world is constructed. And Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse, he says here, if dying simply meant that we disappeared like water absorbed into dry ground, or like a flame being extinguished, we could take death quite lightly. But this is not the case. We abandon our body, but we keep our mind, which travels in the state of transition between death and rebirth, called the bardo. End of quote. So we have to realize the degree to which we leave everything behind, which is final, and at the same time also the projecting quality of our consciousness that will create our future existence, which then will be complete as this one with an experience of a body and a realm. So our present actions will determine what this future life will look like. Famously, this Tibetan saying, if you want to know what you did in your past life, look at your present body. If you want to know what you will be in your future life, look at your present actions. So once we are in the bardo between death and rebirth, we will be driven by our former actions, which is then karma. We'll be driven just like feather in a wind. So that's once we're there. So we want to then recognize and take responsibility fully for our actions now and accumulate the causes for good experiences, what we call good karma, and also presently purify the causes of suffering, negative karma. Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse says that everyone had doubts about this. This obviously also includes Tibetans or Asians who are brought up with the idea of karma. It's sort of like, oh yeah, it'll come in the future. A bit like I think I mentioned last time, teenagers that doubt they'll actually grow up or can't really care about preparing for adulthood. But the thing is, if we have a little bit of emotional intelligence here and reflect carefully, we can see how it is that we construct our experience through physical, verbal, and mental actions. And being aware of this power that we have, in fact, why would we want to relinquish even the slightest positive actions? Rinpoche, he says, quote, do we not value a nugget of gold, no matter how small? So, leave all your activities behind, like a country in a dream. People of Tingri, just put non-action into practice. So there's never any lasting happiness in the activities of ordinary people, like we saw before. And hence, we should follow the examples of the sage, which sees ordinary people's activities as pointless as a dream or as watching children at play. We should let our mind rest free from mental agitation and distraction. So let's say then that we're watching children at play and they take their game very serious. And we can, of course, identify with them and to some extent go along with it. But at the same time, we're not caught. We're not deeply serious about it. So the irreality of these activities also reflected in the image how we could well dream that we're a ruler or a king. But then we wake up. What was there is absolutely gone. So rather than get caught up, we should presently follow the example of the sage, rest the mind, and through resting the mind then gain realization in non-action. So this speaks of the practice of meditation. Since you won't be staying in this world forever, people of Tingri, make your preparations for the journey now. Again, this is something that, in view of myself and my own superficiality, these continual reminders on impermanence are essential. The bullets here then say, who hasn't desired a permanent stable situation or economic independence? We are beguiled by the demon of eternity. Look at the qualitative difference between the deaths of the wise and the foolish. We should be preparing ourselves intelligently for a long journey. So did I just skip one? I think I just skipped one. Oh, well, I'll go through with this one here. I think I might go back to the other one. I thought so. All right. So So anyway, um, so it's quite common that we'd want to build a good house that will last, and that's will be there forever and ever. Khyentse Rinpoche says, which is again coming back to Tibetan conditions, we'd like to build a good house that probably lasts 1,000 years. And it seems to be not that uncommon. I remember Tugurjan also teaching, even a good house only lasts 1,000 years, he says at one point. Anyway, this idea that we could gather enough money so we could never have to worry about money again. So this is something that comes to everybody, but it's very much this naive belief in permanence, and that we could somehow secure a permanent safety and freedom from worry. This is what Khyentse Rinpoche calls being beguiled by the demon of eternity or eternalism. So of course, it's important that we recognize nothing is ours forever. We should look at how some people die while they're overwhelmed with concerns and attachment for dear ones, about their property, about their will, and so forth. And then we can look at how others die carefree. He says it's very inspiring to see how people who've been practicing, how they die, and how they actually have no attachments, seeing that everything that's they had in this life is really just something that is there presently and momentarily on loan. So rather we should be like a sailor who carefully prepares for a long journey at sea, um, who intelligently gathers the necessary things and leaves all the unnecessary things behind. And in this way, we should then prepare for our journey through our future rebirths within the 6 realms of samsara. Okay, let me just go back to this one here. Oh. Ah. I owe you one because I think I left out 16. Sorry, hold on. Yeah. Oh well. I'm gonna. Yeah, it's just my notes are wrong, and it's just not here in the slides. I will actually. I'll insert it, but anyway, those of you who have the book will see the number 16 then, and what it says: the very thing you feel attached to, let go of it. Whatever, people of Tingri, there is nothing you need. So this is actually this is a really profound one. And this is really, you could say, the absolute analysis on things. Look into what is real. Analyze anything we're attached to and get clear about it. We empower ourselves when we emerge from dependency. Sustaining simplicity and contentment through focus, we accomplish the 2 benefits. If the sages did this, how much more important for persons like us? This is kind of a biggie. So even though I'm guilty of muddling up the slide numbers a bit, I'm going to continue just because I prefer if you have it in front of you. So I'll just sort of insert this next time. So yes. Yeah. Okay. Um, hmm. Yeah, if you finish what you have to do. All right, so then the following one. If first you finish what you have to do, you'll never get to the Dharma. People of Tingri, while you're thinking of it, practice straight away. So ordinary activities, they're endless. Do not wait for them to be completed. As soon as the thought of practice occurs, do it. As soon as you have met a teacher and received instructions, you are ready. So this is, of course, familiar, how it's endless. If you ever thought that you should just wait for the right time, you might actually smell how there is an element of either laziness or procrastination of one sort or another. And kind of also a stubbornness that wishes to ignore what we know. And the fact is, one thing leads to another, just like ripples on a lake, and the activities of this life are endless. So particularly what's worrying is that we actually get seduced by this stupid thought that we think there is time and that we can practice later. But the fact is, we've seen or heard of plenty of people who die young or before a ripe old age. So why is it we think that this won't happen to us? Are we going to dismiss this thinking, or to think like that or to act like that is human nature? Are we going to think like this just because others do it? And this is where we want to remember that not everyone has a vision and a path. As practitioners, we have very clear perspective in terms of what brings about confusion and what brings about freedom. So right now we actually stand at crossroads. So this is where we shouldn't procrastinate, and rather we should practice right away. The conditions that are necessary is that we've met a teacher, received their instruction, and that's sufficient. With these two, then we're ready to go. So there's absolutely no reason not to practice right away. Inside the forest, monkeys may be living happily at ease, people of Tingri, but at the edges, forest fires are closing in all around. So death approaches while we are absorbed in ignorance and distraction. We should reflect on what really matters and follow through. And people of my generation probably remember something from John Lennon. Life is, what is it again? Life is what happens while you're busy making other plans, right? So the image here is the monkeys in the center of the jungle having a jolly good time while the fires at the periphery of the jungle is closing in on them. Similarly, the rich, powerful, and proud, we enjoy life, ignoring death. So we want to reflect on what really is required for us at the moment of death and follow through with practice. Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse says, reflect on what really counts at the instant of death and follow the path to enlightenment, which is the only intelligent way to use your life. And if we look at those who have done this, they're not exactly living in self-denial or repression or misery, but we look at great sages like Dilgo Khyentse, like the various great masters that we've encountered, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Tsongsa Jamyang Khyentse, and so on. These are people who fully embrace their existence, and doing so, they are living examples of how we'd want to use our life. So, last one. Birth, sickness, aging, and death flow on, a river without ford or bridge. People of Tingri, have you prepared yourself a boat? So birth, old age, sickness, and death are the four great rivers of suffering. You find this in the sutras and the commentaries. This is a common sort of way of defining the suffering of particularly the human existence. And we should remember the particulars of their reality. We should remember these. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche then does that in the teaching here. The four great rivers of suffering, birth, old age, sickness, and death. They're not exactly polite dinner conversation, but that's also because ordinarily there's no solution to this. So with the practice of Dharma, there is indeed a solution to this predicament, but we have to start off humbly recognizing how, in fact, we're a bit, loath to recognize this. We kind of tend to superficially ignore this. So this has us waste a lot of time. So to avoid that, these four sufferings, these which are a reality we all have to face, we'd want to actually reflect on them. So if you look in the commentary here with Khyentse Rinpoche, he actually describes in some detail, and we should actually be willing to do that wherever we are on the journey. Rinpoche says, soon age will impair our health, weaken our senses, make our teeth fall out, and turn our hair white. Loss of memory will make us cantankerous. Nobody wants to listen to grumpy old people. Anxiety will never stop tormenting us. End of quote. And, quote, withered and in pain, we will finally have to face the agony of death. So these are just, you could say, blunt facts, but in view of the fact that we can do something about this, that we could acquire serenity before we pass, this is something that we shouldn't ignore. So we'll just check if there are some questions, which I believe there are. So there's a question here. When we talk about ignorance, we give the metaphor of clouds. Then what gets caught in the clouds if we are then the sun? Well, the thing is, our Buddha nature is a bit like, you could say, a treasure that's buried under someone's house. They don't know that it's there. And so presently, we don't actually experience Buddha nature. We can intuit it. And this is, you could say, why we actually appreciate things like compassion or wisdom, or why we are touched by someone like a great teacher, the Dalai Lama, for example. That's because we actually have this nature inside. But presently, we also have to humbly recognize there's a qualitative difference between us and the Dalai Lama. And that, you could say, these limitations, they are the clouds. They are, you could say, our fixation on self. But then again, if we look at this self, we can't actually find anything. If we look at objects and think that they're solid, we also keep looking and we find that they actually ultimately have nothing objectifiable about them. So us getting caught in the clouds is really just because we don't properly look at the nature of the clouds. So this is what we need to do, and that is what we do when we establish the view. And then we apply this view then through the practice of meditation, through vipassana. So I hope everybody's, I apologize, there was this one that slipped, and also I apologize for the non-recording, but anyway, I'll be able to re-record it. So in the end of the day, it should all be good. So what's caught is just the view. No, the question here is then, in terms of, you could say, our ignorance and us getting caught up in the clouds. That's just the view. No, what we need is to see through the hoax. It's a bit like when we say we think that a rope is a snake. We actually think it's real. We think I and clinging to me is real, right? And we also think that the object is real. But actually, if we look carefully, there is no self that we can ultimately objectify. So what we want to do with the view is arrive at certainty. Ultimately there is no self. And hence, the remaining in equanimity in meditation makes sense. So the view is what informs our meditation practice. So okay, put on video for this one. So when we establish the view, this means that we actually let's see here. When we establish the view, we're actually understanding reality. We're understanding that this self that we cling to as so solid, it doesn't intrinsically and ultimately exist, and also the objects that we cling to as solid. For example, the objects of our attachment, right? We look at them and we see, what is it that we're really attached to? And the closer we come to what seems like a solid object, we see its construct. So, we might get really excited about getting some new gadget or some new relationship or some new situation in life. But then we discover it's more complex than we initially thought it was. And that's where we discover that things, they don't possess this essence that we, in our ignorance, attributed. And that's where we begin to see through the clouds. We begin to see that we were sort of ignoring things. And so when we begin to see through that, then we begin to become a bit wise. And that's what we're doing then with the view. We're actually, you could say, invoking this wisdom that we have within. We're allowing this wisdom that we have within to come through. But we need to first see through our own ignorance. And that's what we do with the view. So that's where we begin to see that this apparent solidity, these clouds that we cling to, are not so real. Okay, so thank you for participating in this study of the sublime Vajra words of Padampa Sangyé. Thank you very much, and we'll see each other next week. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. Namaskar.